Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radiantresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon. Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of discussion of infertility and miscarriage, stillbirth and child loss, grief and loss of a loved one, mention of cancer and terminal illness, discussion of abandonment and exclusion in the context of grief. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I am welcoming back again the amazing Carrie Hauskins.
You got it. Yep.
Yes, finally, by the third interview, I got it. Carrie is a freelance writer based in Northern California. Her expertise is writing about infertility and the many tangents that radiate from that experience. Her trademark is vulnerable and authentic writing. And after 8 years of trying to conceive multiple miscarriages, working with surrogates, and delivering her stillborn daughter, she embodies all things grief and infertility based. We are going to talk a lot about grief today. That's going to be our topic of the day. If you want more about Carrie's infertility journey, that you can listen to in episode 18, where she goes into more depth about that. It's, I'm sure, going to come up in this episode too, which is because that's a big part of her story and my story. And then if you want to hear more from Carrie as well, on episode 8, she and I go into a little bit more of the second half of my story and things, and a little bit more infertility chat there. But today we're talking about grief. And so, Carrie, how do you want to start us off with grief?
I want to start off by saying I love this topic, and I love when I get chances to talk about it, because often when people even ask me like what I do for work and I say I'm a writer, I never really lead with grief because it is very off-putting, and I acknowledge that it can be very uncomfortable and some people don't want to talk about it, but I do always want to talk about it. And then if somebody like asks, well, what do you write about? I'm like, okay, buckle up, here we go. But it's not a topic that I feel like, I think our culture specifically doesn't do a very good job at creating rituals, at least for me, because I'm not religious. So I don't have a lot of rituals around it. And I had to do a lot of researching and information to see what felt good for me, which made me very curious about it and led into me writing about it. And that's where I got started into it, and now it's like my favorite thing.
It's so interesting. And there's so many varying degrees of grief too, different walks of it and different ways that people deal with it and different stages of it. And so many things that I feel like we could probably talk for days about it. Let's first get into that then, just after your journey.
Yeah, so I started writing a blog on my infertility like in I have a whole timeline next to me because I mapped out my book.
Oh
Um
yeah, Carrie is writing a book,
I
so
am
we'll
writing a
have
book and
to.
I started around 2017 writing a blog about this.
Okay.
And I was very embarrassed about it. So I didn't even tell people I knew that I was like writing about it. And then nobody saw it for a really long time. But then I started sharing it. And I didn't, this was even before I got pregnant. This was even before I was working with a surrogate. It was just like my first few years of infertility. And just even dealing with infertility, I didn't know what to call what I was feeling. And after seeing a therapist, she was like, this is grief. Like you're letting go of a life that you wanted. And even though I still was planning on being a mother at the time, I wasn't becoming a mother in the way that I wanted. And
Mhm.
that felt like a loss because
Yeah.
most people in my life were just having sex and getting pregnant. And me and my husband couldn't do that in the same way. So, like, that alone was like really heavy. And I didn't even admit it for years because I was ashamed of it.
And
And
even I think that's interesting too that within one experience that you are going through, a traumatic experience, I think there are different even within that there are
mhm,
different facets of grief, right?
mhm,
Because you were grieving the loss of embryos and babies. You were
mhm.
grieving the loss of your infertility and being able to carry on your own. And then in the end, you're grieving the loss of the future that you thought you were going to have, all
Absolutely.
within one
Month.
experience.
Yeah, I feel
Yeah.
every month I went through all of
Yeah.
that. Every month when I got my period, it was like, oh, okay, so we're not doing that. Okay.
Yeah.
And that was awful. Like I spent so many first days of my period crying on the bathroom floor, being
Hmm.
like, okay, there's my period and I'm not pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's probably true for
Mm-hmm.
most different, like as I'm trying to think through different grief scenarios, even losing a parent or losing
Mm-hmm.
somebody close to you, you're not just grieving the loss of that person. It's the same thing. You're grieving that future, you're grieving all sorts of different things. So it really comes into play in so many different forms, in so many different situations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's a single person out there that has not experienced grief. Would you
Agreed.
agree? Yeah.
Agreed. And even like when I think a really big part that it resonated with me was when I had a breakup with my best friend because of infertility.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
That was the hardest breakup I've ever been through. And once I was able to identify that as grief, I was like, oh, okay, I can look up resources. And even though it was most of the resources that I found were like when a human dies, I still was able to look at it of, okay, I'm still experiencing a lot of the same feelings. And it was,
Mm.
I was letting go of this friendship. And
And a
that
loss of that person in your life,
absolutely.
even though they're not gone for forever, like from this earth,
Hmm.
they're probably gone from your life
Yes.
for most likely forever.
And just having a word to identify the emotion I was feeling felt
Mm-hmm.
so validating. And then in the beginning, I was like, this isn't grief. Like, she didn't die. But like, my therapist was like, but she died to you. Just like you said, like, she's not in my life anymore. And I think it was just like helped me on like the building blocks of, okay, how do I approach this? How do I deal with it?
Yeah. So, what was that like then as you started embarking on dealing with it? And once you recognize that's what it was, in whether that was your infertility journey or
Hmm.
losing your
Hmm.
friend, how was it working through that?
So, as I mentioned before, like I'm not religious, but I do some like witchy ritual
Mhm.
things. And so
Yeah.
I leaned into that and did a lot of writing, specifically her a letter and then burning it
Hmm.
outside
I've done that.
and like physically trying to get it out and then getting the like burning it to ashes. Not that it took everything away, but it felt really good to see my words disappear in front of me.
Yeah.
And I think a really big part of that too was like trying to make new friends because we had a big circle of friends and
Mm.
I had to remove myself from that because I wasn't getting a lot of support from even our circle of friends of being like, she's pregnant, you need to be there for her. And it was like, I can't even be there for myself. So
Mm.
I think grieving that loss and then trying to put myself in new situations, which took me years of feeling
Sure.
comfortable to like re enter the idea of making new friends. But I did a lot of journaling. I went to therapy and then we started IVF. And then I had this like new hope that I was
Yeah.
so excited about. And then with our first round of IVF, I became pregnant, but then I had a miscarriage. And that was, I didn't even really have the space to grieve that. It was
Mm,
traumatic because it was like, oh my God, I've been trying this for 5 years. And then, oh, like in my head, I was like, of course we're pregnant. Like we did all the work. Like we
yeah.
went,
Yeah.
I did the shots, we paid the money, we did the things.
This is supposed to work.
Yeah, we're following all the directions. It's color
Yeah.
coded and everything.
Yeah.
And then I remember it was like the day before the first day of school. I was a teacher at the time and I was a mess. And
Mm,
like I just like really blocked it out and like I spent about one full day crying and then
mm.
was like, okay, what do I do next? Because they were like, we can jump into the
Yeah.
next cycle. And
Yeah.
so I was like, let's do that and not deal with any of this.
Yeah, for sure. I have definitely been there where you're just like, okay, that happened. What do I do now? Okay, these are the next steps. And this is, and I did that multiple times through my
Yes.
fertility journey of just throwing myself at the next thing. Maybe I'd
Dying on
cry
it.
for a day or two, a week,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're like, okay, got it together.
Yep.
Now I'm going to do this. And this is the next round. And we're going to do it this month. And I need to start prepping this way. And I need to start taking
Mm-hmm.
these supplements. And I need to like, yeah. And then you don't even get that time.
Yeah. Oh, there was no, and I feel like looking back, like I can tell that I felt so out of control that like relying on those next steps was a very like tangible way for me to feel in
Yes.
control.
Yes.
Oh, I can
Mhm.
check that off the list. I did that. I'm calling the doctor. I'm doing all the things. So it was like, it was a way for me to cope. And I think that a lot
Yeah.
of people do that. And I'm not saying that's healthy or unhealthy. I think it's just like a natural thing for many people in the infertility community to do because we're still working towards the goal that we want.
Yeah. And I would even say so my grandpa passed away back in February. And my mom, I would say, has thrown herself into trying to get my grandma taken care of and like their
Mm-hmm.
finances and all of those things, and has not also taken the time to grieve. So I think it's very easy for a lot of people when
Absolutely.
it comes to first facing grief. And maybe if you, especially if you haven't
Mm-hmm.
experienced a lot of it before that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then your first go around, it's so easy to distract and just ignore and not face it head on
Mm-hmm.
and go through the stages.
And I feel like I think it's a lot of way. I think that we are facing it. It's just it feels good to be doing something.
Yeah.
Like even when we were talking about this before we started recording of the park fire that is burning
Yeah.
very close to our house. And when that was happening and I was like under evacuation watch, I just started rage cleaning. And it was like a
Oh.
joke because it was like, well, if my house burns down, at least it'll be clean.
Oh
But
no.
like I felt like I needed to do something and there was
Yeah.
literally nothing I can do except pack and be ready to go. And once I was done with that, I was like, I guess I'll clean because it made me feel like I was
Mhm.
participating in something positive.
Yeah.
And my friends were making fun of me because they're like, I'm on the couch crying. And I was like, I did that too. I just, I'm also crying while I'm scrubbing the sink, but I just felt like I had to do something with my hands.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting way that I think some people respond like, we need to do something. And when you're so out of control, you're grasping for it. And I really felt that because after I had that miscarriage and we went right into our next round of IVF and I got pregnant and carried my daughter for 8 months. And then when I delivered her stillborn, I became very anxious, like an anxiety that I had never experienced before. And to deal with that, I was grasping for anything that I can control. And I was working with the therapist, but it was also like I got very into food in a very maybe non-productive way, but I was dealing with
Mhm.
some like autoimmune diseases. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to deal with this with food and
Yeah.
like control my food and go on autoimmune protocol for months. And it felt like I was at least trying to do something. And I had to like, it took about a year, maybe a year and a half where I could like ease off of that and be like, okay, you can still live a functioning life without
Yeah.
trying to be in control. But it was like, I felt so out of control. And that
Yeah.
was a scary feeling of, oh,
Yeah.
wow, really bad things can happen and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah. It's infuriating.
Yes, very much so.
Lose that control, and you try to grasp at any other type of control So I imagine that is a part in different forms, maybe, but a part of a lot of people's grief journey then. Hi, everyone. It's Tawny from Radiant Resilience. I have some exciting news. I've been nominated for an award in the Women in Podcasting Awards under the category of Inspiration and Motivation. I'm so honored and I love your support. If you found any inspiration or motivation from this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to go online and vote for Radiant Resilience. Please visit the link in the show notes. Your vote means the world to me, and it helps us reach even more people who might need to hear these stories. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. I truly appreciate you.
I also know that like people like go into a freeze mode and like they won't do anything.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like it's out of, for me specifically dealing with the loss of my daughter, it just felt like out of order of the way the world's supposed to work. And so like
Yeah.
I just felt so lost of, was anything supposed to go in order then? And it
Mm.
can be very like overwhelming and scary. And even with just like the idea of infertility of, oh, well, I was taught that I just have sex and I have a baby. In fact, I was trying not to have a baby for so long because
So
apparently it
long.
was
Yeah.
so easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's like a whole mind shift of, oh, I never thought about not being able to have a child when I was like a kid dreaming of being a mother.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You've been through a lot, and I'm so sorry,
Yes.
but I'm very glad that you are where you are now, and it's brought
Yes.
you to this whole grief journey too.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what else? Talk about the like stages of grief.
So there is, I think it's like the 5 or 6 stages from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which
Okay.
is very interesting because she wrote them for specifically people that were dying themselves.
Mm.
But we as like a society have taken that on as, oh, when like somebody else is dying. It's like
Oh,
anger,
interesting.
forgiveness. I forget them. Because I remember when I first delivered my daughter stillborn, I was like, okay, here are the steps.
Oh.
Let's check them off. Let's go through the stages. And that is not how that works by any
No.
means. And I just thought that since these were like very famous stages of grief, that I would just check them off. Because I remember like my husband and I never really hit anger. Like we were never really angry. We were sad, but we met with a grief counselor. And I remember her saying, do you blame anybody for this?
Ooh.
And we'd never talked about it. And we looked at each other and we were like, no, maybe if we would have caught the disease I had sooner, but also that feels like a slippery slope because
Yeah.
I can't go that route. I'll never get out.
Yeah.
And she was like, that's a really like positive response because blaming is usually anger and
Hmm.
anger is usually hiding something else. Or like,
Okay.
because she was like, it's sad. And a lot of people like will use that anger and hide to not be sad. And I'm like, I'm not mad at anybody. Of course I want her here,
Yeah,
but
sure.
I'm more sad. And I remember asking my counselor or my therapist years later of like, I never did the anger part. Is that going to come up when I'm like 50 or something? And she was like, maybe, but also it's not linear. We're not checking things
Yeah.
off the way you want to do it.
Yeah, and then each stage is going to be a different length of time for each person too,
Absolutely. And
depending
they're
on
going to
how you're
mean,
processing it.
yes, they're going to mean different things and the different other things are going to come up. And I think one of the best things for me was to get really curious about my grief. Like I mentioned before, I don't have a religion, so I didn't grow up with like rituals around this. And like when Clementine, my daughter, when she died, we didn't want to have a funeral. I don't know why. So we had we had her cremated. And at the funeral house, they offered, which I think this is common. I was unaware. How would I know before? But they offer free funerals for stillbirths. Like you can have
Oh,
a whole
really?
funeral at their house, parlor, or whatever. And it just didn't feel right to us. I didn't know what felt right. But in that moment, I was like, I don't think this, I just want her ashes. I just wanted to bring her home.
Yeah.
And a lot of our family and friends were like, are you going to have like a memorial or something? We want to honor her. And I was like, I don't know. I think that's on you because I'm still figuring out how I need to do this.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I'm really glad you're sharing that because that is also something that my family's been going through with my
Mm-hmm.
grandpa is my
Mm-hmm.
mom. At first, she said she absolutely did not want to do anything for
Mm-hmm.
my grandpa.
And this
And
is her father.
yes.
Okay.
And I was like, what? Because to me, that just seemed like the normal progression of
Mm-hmm.
things. Like you
Mm-hmm.
do, this person dies, you do a service for them
Mm-hmm.
of some
Mm-hmm.
sort. He was old, so he
Sure.
lived a long life.
Right.
It wasn't a traumatic thing. It was a little surprising because he was fine and then he was sick and then he was not here anymore. And so we weren't fully prepared for that, but
Mm-hmm.
he was old. And so I was like, let's just do like a celebration of life or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then as I was talking through it a little bit more with my mom, a little bit more recently, because I was like, it's been like February, several months out. My sisters and I would love to do something. And she was just like, she had all this anxiety over all different facets of the planning process and
Uh-huh.
dealing with extended families coming in and all these people. And I think a lot of it is because she still hasn't dealt with her grief also
Sure.
around him, and that may seem more final.
Uh,
So it's just interesting because I think from my perspective, it's not my parent. In your case, it's these people who have opinions about what you should do, and it was your
yes.
child.
Yes.
And it's hard as an outsider to be like, why aren't you doing that? What
Right.
to do?
Yeah.
So
And I
I
think like
mean,
it's valid. I don't know, because people want to be able to honor
yeah,
the death, the person, the love, and acknowledge their existence. But funerals are for the living.
yeah. That's
And
what my mom said early on too.
I know with my parents, at least my mother has been very open about what she wants specifically. And it's cool. Thanks for making me a list because I'll do that. I love a list. I'll do it.
Yeah, yeah,
And there was no list for a baby.
yeah,
And especially because she would have, if we would have had a C-section, she would have lived.
yeah.
So it was just like, I didn't know what to do. And I didn't like the idea of seeing a small coffin was like not an option for
Mm,
me. Like I was
yeah,
like,
no.
nope, this is not how I wanted. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And so like now we have her ashes and she sleeps next to our bed every night and we say goodnight to her every single night. And the grief counselor encouraged that of you got to say her name. You need to acknowledge their existence because people don't know. We go out into the world, people don't know you're dealing with that. And I remember that was like, because I stayed in the house for the first couple of weeks. I did not want to leave the house. And the only time I left the house was to go see this grief counselor. And I was like, I'm really afraid that to leave the house because I'm going to go out into the world and nobody is aware and I can't handle that. And she was
Yeah.
like, super common response. But she was like, but you need to start like walking to the mailbox, walking to the end of the street because she was like, this can also become a slippery slope because you're going to try
Yeah.
to control your surroundings. And one thing that really I probably read it somewhere, like really like that I did is I would because people would ask to help, right? Like, how can I help? And it was like, I don't
Mm.
know. I don't know what I need. So I started like Googling, how can people help me?
Those people could have Googled that themselves.
People don't do that for the most part.
No.
And
Yeah.
I like wanted to be because I love going on walks. I go on a walk every day, at least a walk every day. And so I enlisted like my walking friends and was like, can you come walk with me? And I just need you to like be aware that I might lose my shit and you might just have to like take me home. And they were like,
Yeah.
okay. And I remember like being on this walk one time. We have this park near us. This is the park that burned, but we were at the park and there was like a person walking towards us. And I was like, okay, I'm going to say hello and was like gearing up. And hello, I waved. They just waved back and I kept walking and I was like, oh my God, I did it. Okay. Like I can be a human in
Yeah.
and I can do the things that I used to do. But it's just so weird after letting go of this life. And I think also with like babies, like you're letting go of the future. You're letting go of the what
Yes.
is to come. And granted, we did have a body, but we had a miscarriage before. And it's just the letting go of your future self, which was one of the scariest parts for me. And that came up a
Mm.
lot in therapy for me. Of the hardest part was letting go of the life that I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so hard because you expect it to be a certain way.
Mm.
And I had someone in my life who lost their husband at a fairly early age. And same thing, like she said, one of the hardest things was seeing other people on social media celebrating anniversaries
Mm-hmm.
because she
Mm-hmm.
was like, I'm only gonna get one. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was very difficult of letting go of the life that she thought she was going to have with this
Yeah.
person for forever.
Which
So,
is a type of grief. Granted, losing a body is a grief, but like just losing those future ideas of having the life that you want. And for me, it was difficult to shift my perspective of, okay, what life do I want?
yeah.
And that was because now we're child free after infertility, because after 8 years and working with the surrogate, it was just like, I'm so tired of being sad. I want to have a happy life.
Want to live.
And I
Yeah.
want to live. Yeah. I want to not have my whole world focus around my period.
Ugh, the damn period. I'm
Even
sorry
though
for all
now
of
I'm in perimenopause and it still is focusing on it, but it's in a different way. It's in a
yeah.
different way.
Every month when I get my period, I'm just like, guys have no idea how lucky they
No
are.
idea.
Like,
No idea.
to not have to deal with all this stuff. And it's just
I
pleasant.
love those like videos where they have like men hooked up to the period cramps. Cause I'm like, cause all of them are like, this is crazy. It's yes, it is crazy.
And that's not even labor cramps,
Exactly. Yeah,
right?
exactly. You're not
Oh
even
my God.
bleeding out. So
Yeah. 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 It's awful. So, anyways, side tangent there, but
it's real though. It's
it's
real.
real.
And I
But
think like infertility is so wrapped up in our
yes.
cycles. And
Yes.
like even tracking my cycle, I didn't track it for years because I was
Mhm.
like, it was triggering for me. I was
Yeah.
like, I don't
Yeah.
want to remember this.
Yeah.
And then I would go to the doctor and they'd be like, when was your last period? And I'm like, I don't know. Like it was the normal time. And they're
The
like, you
normal
need to be
time.
tracking it. What if you get pregnant? And I'm like, I don't want to have this conversation.
Dude.
I actually went through like a string of general practitioners. I have one now where I'm like, I can track it now, but we're not discussing birth control. We're not,
Mhm.
because like, this is, and they're like, you never, there was one that was like, but you never know. And I was like, you are right. You are right. You never know. I don't want to go down that road. I went down that road for too long.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. It's crazy. I do still put my periods into the app,
Mhm,
but I
mhm.
just put that in there for that reason. So that if I
Yes.
do go to the doctor or something is wrong and they're like, when was your last period? Then I
Yes.
do know that. But I was recently experiencing a little bit of, I don't know if it was PMDD or PMS like symptoms, but definitely one of the two that was
Mhm.
more anxious. And I was talking to a friend and she was like, right before I get my period, I very frequently spiral. And
Same.
yeah. And she goes, so maybe you should like, she's like, do you track your period? You should maybe look at your app or something. And I was like, I do, but I'm really trying to not look at it
Right.
very
I did it for
often.
so long for other
Yeah.
reasons, but
Yeah.
like,
Just trying to break that habit and break that thought process in my brain of constantly being like, where am I at my period? Let me look
mhm.
at what day. Maybe I'm still
Mhm. Yep.
pre-ovulation. Ooh, maybe I should have
Yep.
more sex. Oh, I'm
Mhm.
past ovulation. Oh, do my boobs hurt? Do I?
Yes, it's such a slippery slope. And it's
Yeah.
weird the things that come up. Like I took a COVID test yesterday because I felt so terrible. I don't have COVID, but
Okay.
even the
Mhm.
COVID test,
Yeah.
reading it was like,
Waiting for that
this is
second
like a
line.
pregnancy test.
I
Like
have
it's
seen so many reels and TikToks and stuff about
yes.
that too. But it's
Yeah.
like the same thing of sitting there waiting for however many minutes. And
And you're like,
there's,
is it gonna show
I
up?
mean, I guess depending on where you're at, do you want the line or not?
Exactly. Yeah. Could mean different spots. It's interesting and because I used to get triggered so much and things still trigger me. I want to acknowledge that. It's less and less because we're about 4 years out of like just of stopping trying altogether. But the things that like trigger me or especially in the past have I used to just lose my mind with it and not know how to respond. And I feel like that is a type of grief of I
Yes.
don't want to see a reminder of this. I
Hmm.
don't want to know that I started my period or that I'm not pregnant. And now, like I said, it's different kinds of triggers. They're more like grief triggers. A lot of like I think about people that have babies that are my that would have been Clementine's age. That's hard sometimes. And it's I try to give myself a lot of grace because it's like dealing with infertility is such a wild experience that I never expected. And it was so much more difficult than I ever thought it would be, which was a shock. And I think that many people feel that way. And also, like when people say, I'm on the other side of it. And a lot of times when they say that's because they have children. And I'm like, I'm on the other side of it too. I just don't have children. So it's,
Yeah.
I try to give myself grace, but also I really like to get curious about it of, okay, is there other circumstances in my life that's making this really highlighted? Because I can be stressed about other things and all of a sudden seeing a pregnant woman and you're like, oh, but
Yeah.
I think with that, I try to like, I really, and the grief counselor really stressed this of don't hide your grief. Talk to your
That's really good advice.
talk to, even if it was like an embryo or even your past self. I do that a lot of talking to like my past self. I think a lot
Okay.
about younger me and older me. Like, what would they want for me right now?
So not even necessarily talking to a friend or a family
Mm-hmm.
member or being
Mm-hmm.
vocal about it in that way or your partner or whatever, but
Mm-hmm.
talking to, so if you don't want to be that open with the world
Yep.
about your grief,
Yep.
because there are a lot of people that like to deal with it behind closed doors, but it's good
Absolutely.
to talk to like your past self, or
Mm-hmm.
if you lost a person, would it be talking to that person too?
I even other people that I've lost in my life, I talk to them all the time, which I don't even know. It like makes me feel, because I was say I don't know what the purpose is, but it makes me feel good. It makes me feel like they're
Yeah.
listening and it just helps. I do a lot of also, like I said before, I write a lot to people or to things. Like I have a whole journal just to Dear Clementine of this is what you would have been or something like that. And I don't like I don't try to ruminate. I don't go back a lot, but it's just like a way to let it flow.
Release.
And that was a big thing with the grief counselor of being able to like utilize your grief and move with it because
Mm.
you don't want it to get like stagnant and stuck because it is kind
Yeah.
of like energy
Yeah.
and you gotta do something with it. Some people have funerals, some people have a memorial every year. Now, those aren't the things that we do, but like I try to do things with that. Like I do have specific dates, like Clementine's, we call it her death day. When we met her, that day is just for me, and I go to the spa, I get massages, I buy myself luxurious things because I want to celebrate it. And
Yeah.
I want to treat it as like a celebration, like we were talking about before, of like a celebration of life, because like I did get this little piece of it. And I also think that I get to honor all of the parts of me that wanted this life and didn't get it. And I can still
Mm.
acknowledge that younger Carrie wanted that.
Yeah.
We didn't get it, but we're also still like pretty happy.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say for somebody then for that, the talking back? You can always do your past self, right? But what
Hmm.
about people who have gone through like divorce or something like that?
I haven't done that, so I don't really know. But my number one thing is always like talk to a therapist. I think having a
Yeah.
therapist is probably one of the biggest game changers, and it doesn't have to be forever.
Yeah.
And it's just nice having someone outside your bubble. And specifically with therapy, I like to have at least the therapist that I've really enjoyed working with. They always ask me, like, what do you want out of this?
Mm.
And for me, I'm like, I want goals, I want homework, and I want permission, and I want gold stars. And they're like,
I
okay.
love that. Yes.
But that's also me very specifically knowing what I want. And that's something that I feel like I've always been pretty good at, but I do know that can be hard for some people because, especially when you're dealing with infertility and you're not getting a kid, what do you want after that? Which is a very scary space. But I
Yeah.
think being really curious about it and really exploring it, like trying different hobbies is I think a really interesting thing. Like I do a lot of art, not art that I'm showing anybody. I just do it just to do something. I also, being a writer, I do a lot of writing on my own when journaling and things like that and pushing myself out of my comfort zone. Like I recently became part of this like storytelling group in town and I've met so many wonderful people through it, like new amazing, hopefully lifelong friends that I am making here. And I've shared my story, but also getting to hear their stories that have nothing to do with
Yes.
mine also brings up a lot of other feelings and just like the connections. I think it's one of the best things that I love about the grief is that the empathy and connection that we do have with other people. And no matter what type of grief it's, oh, I've dealt with some loss as well. And even if it's not a body, it can still be a loss.
Yeah.
And seeing that in other people, because I feel like we just all want to be seen and being able to see that in other people and be like, I see you, I recognize you, and I think you're still like the coolest.
Oh, yeah. And I think when you're going through grief too, it does feel isolating and lonely, even though
Hmm.
it's like I said in the beginning, I don't think there's a single person that hasn't experienced some type of
Yes.
grief, right?
Yes.
Maybe again, maybe not your exact situation, maybe not what we immediately go to in our brains of losing a human being close to us. But it can feel so lonely and so isolating, and not knowing how to deal with it
I
is,
think one of the big things too is maybe find somebody who has dealt with your grief. Even
yeah,
if it's like
it
somebody
does
on,
help.
yeah, like even if it's somebody online that you never even speak to, but like just see them, following them on social media or reading something that they put out there, just to be like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Cause it's
Yeah.
very easy to feel alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that's something I've dealt with a lot too, is feeling so lonely. And so nobody gets me and
Mm-hmm.
nobody understands where I'm going. And especially in the route of potentially choosing to then be choosing to be childless, then there's a lot of judgment that comes with that too from the
Absolutely.
rest of the world. And so, yeah, finding your people, but also I think recognizing and realizing that everybody has some walk of grief.
And if they don't, they will.
And even though it's not the exact same, a lot of the feelings are the same, and you can relate and lean on each other and
Mm-hmm.
have that compassion and empathy from the right type of people.
Yes. And I remember right after Clementine died, I started attending like a local infertility support group because we were still trying to have a baby just with a surrogate.
Mm-hmm.
And even that was a little much for me because people in the support group started getting pregnant.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, okay. So I feel like this might not be the group for me, which was fine. I did might meet some people. I met my therapist through that, which I still utilize today. So there's that, but it's you can try something and it doesn't have to be the right fit. Like
Yeah.
you,
And
I
that's okay.
expected it. Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember walking to this group being super scared, but then expecting it to be this life-changing experience and then being like, I don't think I belong here. And it's
Mhm.
fine. They wanted me there. Like they encouraged me to be there, but it was like, oh, and there's one fertility clinic around here and everybody goes there. And we're like talking about the doctors and they're like, oh,
Uh,
and it's like, oh, I don't want to do that. That's not, I'm in a different space. And so then I started finding groups that were like specifically child free, childless, and this was after we decided. So I was like, okay, I can finally. And even before we completely stopped, I started like just dipping my toe into following some of these accounts online of being like, how do I feel about that?
that's
I don't
how I think
know.
I found you. It's like, I'm like, oh, all of a sudden, I don't remember if I heard it in a podcast or I just saw something on Instagram, or I don't remember exactly, but I did. I was like, oh, because I'm like, I don't know what to do, because
Totes.
I started out in the Facebook groups and the communities
Mm-hmm.
online that were people trying to get pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
right? The TTC groups, the
Yep.
like, look at my ovulation
Mm.
test, blah, blah, blah. And then I morphed into the IVF groups
Mm-hmm.
and that whole group. And then those started driving me insane, because then it was like all these people, and I'm sorry, but this is real, like the people who were posting about their first go round of
Uh-huh.
IVF, and I'm just sitting here like, I can't with these
Right.
and I know
Like,
I was there at one point, but
of course.
I'm like, nope, can't do it anymore. So then after multiple rounds of IVF, I still didn't feel like I fit anywhere. And then
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what do I do now? Who do
Mm-hmm.
I look towards now? I have no idea. And then somehow I came across the term childless, and then childless not by choice.
Mm-hmm.
And that started leading me into the right circles. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know this was a thing.
I didn't know it was a
Oh,
thing
I don't
either.
feel alone. I feel seen, and I don't feel so alone, because there are people out there that are going
Yes.
through it too.
And I think that it's important for us to try the different groups and
Yes.
try the different things. And I mean, I don't like it when they always don't work out because that's never fun. But it's
Yeah.
like, sometimes we have to find out, we have to go through what we don't want to know what we do
Yes.
want. Like, I
Yes.
think about that with like when we can't think of what to eat for dinner, we often say, what do we don't want? And we like
Mm.
do a don't want. And then it gets us to, I could have that. So it's like, you have to try things out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there are a lot of people in a lot of those online community groups, whether it's Facebook groups or just following Instagram accounts like yours and stuff. But I often find that a lot of people don't necessarily know they can look that direction for that
Don't.
support.
Oh, well,
So
I didn't even want to. I didn't want to look at that direction at all. Like thinking about not having children felt like a nightmare. And it was
yeah.
like, no, that's not going to be
Yeah.
my life.
Same. And just in general, and with grief, even like losing a parent, or like my
Mm-hmm.
grandma has really bad dementia. And so I've encouraged my mom to find dementia
Uh-huh.
Alzheimer's groups on Facebook and stuff like that. And then, but again, there's like a ton of different ones.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to enter probably each one or
Mm-hmm.
read the description, see how many people are in them and see how
Yeah.
they're run to see what fits with you the best. But I think I have made amazing friends through the online community and
Same.
amazing people that have, like you, who have experienced some of the similar things to me. And so I think that's, as much as we have our qualms with social media and the internet, I think that is one of the nice things about it, is finding the community that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Absolutely. Because like many people that I have in real life, most of my friends, if not, I think I can think of 3 friends, they all have kids.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them didn't deal with infertility. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
that, and like they're supportive and stuff, but
Sure.
it's just different.
Yeah.
And when you can connect with somebody and be like, oh my God, I know exactly what you're talking about. You hated tracking your cycle too? Okay. Okay. You cried on the bathroom floor too? Okay. I felt very alone in that moment, but like we were not alone.
And when you find those people, you can also say the icky things that you probably would say to
Yes.
other people.
Yes, absolutely.
There's so many things where I'm just like, can I just be mean right now?
Yes. So those are
But
some of
it's
my
honest, it's real, it's exactly how I'm feeling. And to know that, to have somebody validate those feelings too, I
yes.
think helps significantly through the
Oh
process.
my gosh, absolutely. It was a game changer for me, and I also found the majority of my community online, which I was not expecting, and it changed literally my life. Like I quit my teaching job to be like, maybe I'll write for this community, and now that's what's happening. And
Yeah.
it's not something I expected, but it's also I love how it's turned out. Like I love my story because it's mine.
Yeah.
And I feel like I have tried to flip the switch on that because I used to not like I didn't love my body, I didn't love my
Mm-hmm.
life. But it was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, if I keep talking to myself this way, I'm not going to be the person that I want to be, like which is just happy. I just wanted to be happy because I forgot what that felt like.
Yeah, but it's so hard to switch off all those.
Oh my gosh.
Of-
Therapy was a big one for me. Like just
Right.
having a certified person be like, I think you're going to be okay. And I was like, okay, if you think so, it's probably true.
But the could haves and the should haves and the would
Mm-hmm.
haves and
Mm-hmm.
I should have done this, or and again, that goes for all situations, like
Mm-hmm.
what you could have done differently, or what have, or what should have happened differently, or whatever. There's nothing you can do about that
Mm-hmm.
now.
And
But
was asked to like host this support group recently, and it was for a group that is trying to get pregnant, and
oh,
nobody showed up. And it was fine. I had this in the back of my mind. Like the person who hosted it was there. And so we just chatted the whole time, which was great. I did not hate that. I loved chatting
okay.
with her. But she was like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed. And I was like, I understand. This is not easy to look at. And I don't want to say that in a negative way, but like I'm a lot of people's fears. I was that once for sure. I didn't want to hear what people without kids wanted to say because it was like that's not going to be me. And I think that goes for a lot of grief things of I don't want to we just had to put one of our dogs down, which was so
Mhm.
sad. And our other dog is on hospice. And
Mm.
I have a couple of friends that are like, "Oh, my dog's never going to die." And I'm like, I see how that might make you feel better in your heart, but we all know that's not real.
No.
And
Oh
I can't
no.
tell myself the fake stuff because it's going to break your heart. And it's going to break my heart anyways when we put
Right.
our gentleman down, but I know it's going to happen. And like having a hospice nurse come in and talk to us about what to expect, and it's just okay, it's not as scary. It's still going to be the saddest day, but it's
Sure.
not going to be like I didn't think this was happening kind of thing. And so I
Yeah.
think like acknowledging that like our parents are going to die, and that's really scary. Like my mom is one of my favorite humans, but
Mhm.
she's going to die. And I don't want her to.
No, of course not. It's hard. We've tried to have those conversations with our parents too, my husband and I, about being prepared for when that
Mhm.
day does come. I will say that my mom was not prepared. My grandparents did not prepare her. My grandparents, I think, thought they were going to live for forever. They didn't want to face their
Sure.
own mortality
Yeah.
either. And so it's just like, we just don't talk about it. We don't talk about it. But with Colin's parents, we are a lot, he's an only child, so we are a lot more open with them.
Mhm.
And he's very
Mhm.
real with them too. And he's, I
Mhm.
know you don't want to face this. I know you don't want to talk about it. And I hope it's still 20 plus years in the future, but this is reality. It's
Yeah. And
gonna
it's just
happen.
me dealing with
Yeah.
it. So can
Can you
we
help me
talk
out?
about it? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Because also leaving your loved ones to care for
Mhm.
all of that stuff for you and not addressing it, I think is also not okay. And I
Yes.
think that some people end up with anger over that too.
Oh my gosh. There's been my mother has always talked about her death. Like so much so that I was like, "Mom, can we chill out?" And
Yeah.
she was like, "No, we cannot," because she dealt with so many people in her life dying not in a way that was prepared. It
Mm.
left her with so many like pieces to pick up and pay for and deal with. And she was like very adamant this would not happen to me. And I'm very grateful for that, especially now that she has like cancer. She's in a good spot, but she's also like, she still talks about it. And it, while I don't necessarily love it, I do know what she wants. I know where she wants to be buried. I know how she wants her funeral to be. And so it's okay. I at least have an idea. And not that I'll be in any space to be like, who knows? I don't know. I often don't
Yeah,
like to project where I'll be because I don't know.
for
But it's
sure.
just, I don't know. You just never know. So I did want to talk about this woman that I worked for. And
Yes.
she gets into this because she works with like death doulas and things like that to
Oh, I
help
didn't even know that
people.
was a thing.
I didn't know that was a thing either. And it like helped people like deal with death and mainly for the family, like a hospice, but more for the family's like mental well-being.
Okay.
So her name is Cole Imperi, Imperi, and she runs the School of American of Thanatology. And
Okay.
thanatology is the study of death, dying, and bereavement.
Wow.
And she's such an amazing resource. And she's like cool and funky and has a mohawk and loves her dogs. Also, she doesn't have kids. She found out when she was like in her early 20s that like she couldn't have kids. That was also like a, oh, I can follow this woman because
Yeah.
I feel a little safe.
Yeah. You had that tie to her. Yeah, for
Yes.
sure.
Um, and I started taking courses from her specifically on thanabotany, which is how flowers and grieving go together and like
Oh.
rituals that have been passed down through generations from different cultures. And it was very interesting to me to think about like a flower because I love flowers. I love gardening. I love the springtime. And I specifically wrote about feverfew, which is my favorite flower. It's like a teeny tiny daisy.
Okay.
And daisies, I was unaware of this. Daisies are the flower that represent a child that has died.
Oh,
And
wow.
they like the lore is that the flowers used to close at night, but they would open every day. And it was a reminder to parents that there is still reason to wake up every day and keep
Mm.
going and living. And almost every flower has some sort of connection to grief in some way. And it was like
Oh,
a really interesting class to just
that is fascinating.
yeah, and she taught you how to like press flowers and preserve them. So there's like a tangible aspect to it. And then I also wrote a paper, but then I started taking other classes about like writing about it. And then I connected with her personally and was just like blown away by the things that she's done because she's also very into shadow loss, which
Yes.
is when you are grieving, but there isn't necessarily like a body to grieve, like a divorce, or if your house burns down, or it's like letting go of something, but that's not necessarily like a funeral aspect or a funeral
Right.
would respond to that. And she has studied with colleges and they do like work on this. She has a TED talk on it.
Oh, wow.
And it's just really like helpful to know that there's a term for this that she came up with because it's a weird feeling of, oh, I'm letting go of something, but there isn't a funeral and there isn't
Yeah.
like a traditional ritual to let this go.
I feel that way about my embryos. I never did get pregnant. I mean,
Right.
I had one that was, I think I was pregnant for a minute, but it was a very quick, like 2 days later,
Uh-huh.
not anymore. But I have often wondered, like, how do I,
What do I
to
do?
me, to the general public and people on the outside that have never been through this, maybe that's not something, but it was a chance at a baby for me, and it was one of my babies. And I have never been able to like fully, I feel like I've grieved it, but you don't get that closure the same
No,
way. Mhm.
absolutely. And she does a lot of work on shadow loss specifically. And it's and that was like how I found her. Cause I was like, oh my gosh, this is what infertility is for me. Like I
Yeah.
had to let go of the way I wanted to become a mother. And she's just a very great resource. She's a great follow on Instagram in general, but she also has like a great website. And like I said, her TED Talk on shadow loss is a really nice like intro to her.
Yeah.
And she's a wonderful human in general, so there's also that.
Yeah, yeah, that helps.
But she really helped me and many others just get curious about your grief. Okay, what are you going to think about your grief as something? What are you going to do with it? Paint it, or you're going to burn it, or you're going to throw it like a baseball, or you're going to travel with it because you have it. No matter what, you have it.
Yeah.
And it's not really ever going to go away, which I
Mm.
have come to love because I feel like my 30s, all of my 30s were trying to get pregnant. And I don't want to like feel bad about that, feel shame. I don't want to forget it because I'm who I am now because of that.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to like, okay, what are we going to do with our grief today? What are we going to do with it? And being able to like get curious about it. And for like I said, for me specifically, since I love flowers so much, like doing a lot with flowers, growing specific flowers,
I love
knowing that
that.
they come back different times of years and things like that is like a really special way to honor it that also is like beautiful. It's accepted by society, not that like it has to be, but it's not like you're like in the streets burning a tree or something
Yeah.
like it's
Having a
a
bonfire.
yeah, it's like it's a welcoming experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I recently actually, I would love to know if you've experienced something like this or if this is a common thing with grief too. As I'm processing my stuff, I had something come up recently with work. So as a hairdresser, when I first started the salon that I'm at currently, which I have been at for 10 years, so if that gives you a time frame,
Mhm.
I was so inspired, so excited, so creative. I was working on mannequin heads on my downtime.
Mhm.
I did Denver Fashion Week, Hair for Denver Fashion Week. I was doing weddings. I was doing classes nonstop. I was watching YouTube videos nonstop. I was learning so much and taking so much in. And I honestly think that was probably my best chapter
Sure.
of, it's just changed now, but it was probably one of my best chapters of doing hair. And I recently realized, because I was like, where did that go?
Mhm.
What happened to
Mhm.
it? And
Great question
I
to ask yourself.
realized the same time that went away is when I started my infertility journey.
Mm.
And I was mad.
Mhm.
I was
Mhm.
like, just another
Super
fucking
valid.
thing that it
Yep.
took from me. I was
Mhm.
so upset. And I was like, I had to grieve then the
Mhm.
loss of those years of, because instead of looking at YouTube videos of hair videos or whatever, because that was before we had a lot of online education for the hair
Sure.
industry. Anyways, now it's rampant. But watching those, I was watching YouTube videos on how to give myself shots. And
Yeah.
instead of researching different color lines and techniques and how to do this, I was researching how to get pregnant. And that
Mhm.
became my sole focus for all of those years that I literally lost that piece of me.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if that is common. Does that stuff
I
creep up in different grief scenarios too? Like all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh,
I would assume
I lost
so.
that too.
I would assume so because grief changes you
Mm-hmm.
and you become consumed with either healing, hiding, or trying to control. It takes things away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And I genuinely think that those things, though, that part of you is still there. It's just like in a
Yeah.
different way. It's like, because that I think about I was so much freer, especially of anxiety prior to infertility.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the same fears about trying new things as I do now.
Yeah.
And I recently started learning to row on the water, and I had a panic attack because it just
Oh,
seemed so scary to put myself out there and do it. But I was like, put on your big girl panties and do it. And I
yeah.
did, but I cried. And
Oh, but you
I'm,
did it.
but I did. I was like crying on the water, and the coach was like, "We appreciate all feelings." I was like, "Thank you." because I'm clearly having an emotional reaction to this.
Oh,
But I
yeah.
think that like life experience that we went through of trying to get this traditional life and the way it was taken away is scary of, oh, I can't have nice things all the time.
Mhm.
But we can just we can, it's just different. And it that like fear taps into me a lot of, ooh, you're trying something new, you're researching it, you're buying books on it. Oh, do we want to do this? Because is it going to work out? Because that's the fear. And genuinely, we don't know if it's going to work out.
No idea. Mhm.
I didn't know if I was going to flip the rowboat. That's not
Yeah.
what it's called. I know I'm using the incorrect terms, but I'm new. But like it's just it is scary, but I also think that we survived this crazy thing that a lot of people don't deal with.
Yeah.
Yes, they deal with other things, but we can use that to move us forward of like, okay, I'm still here after all this crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you like miss being creative? Are you creative in other ways?
mean,
Or is that like your favorite way to utilize your creativity?
at the moment, yeah. I've
Mhm.
actually, everybody keeps talking about painting and artistic things like that. And I've thought about trying to dive into something like that, a little bit more
Uh-huh.
creative. But
Mhm.
no, I miss being that creative with hair. Obviously, it's a canvas that I get to work on daily,
Mhm.
and I
Mhm.
do love it.
Mhm.
I just don't feel like I've got the creativity I had back then or the
Mhm.
motivation, even after
Mhm.
everything I've been through, too. I'm not the same person I was then either.
Absolutely. Yeah, which I think is again very valid
Mhm.
because you're not the same.
No. And how can you be after grief?
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely.
again, any type of grief, it will change you.
Mhm.
And not always for the bad. Definitely good
No,
too.
I think
Yeah.
so, and well, not I think it is actually more often good than not because again, we have that compassion and connection.
Hmm.
But I was an art teacher, and I think
Oh.
that we're all like I think as humans we're supposed to create in some form. And that can be literally I don't consider myself an artist. I remember when I was offered this job, I was like, I'm not an artist. And my principal was like, I don't care how you identify. I think you'd be great at this.
Oh.
And I would get up in front of the class because you'd be like, I can't do this. And I'm like, this is my portrait. And I would literally draw a stick figure because that's not my favorite, but also I do love stick figures. Like they're cute.
Yeah.
So I think that we as humans have to figure out ways to create. But especially when I was teaching, I really learned that like kids with a lot of trauma don't feel safe to create. It's a very unsafe feeling
Oh.
because it's risky. You don't, it might not turn out the way that you want. It's not going to look exactly like that person's over there. And my main mission became like creating just a space for just kids to create of girl, look at my portrait. It's a stick figure. I know you can do a stick figure. You
Yeah.
could probably do more, but also stick figure is also welcomed because it's where your teacher's
Yeah.
at. So like,
Yeah.
it was very like eye opening of like, when bad things happen, it's because when you're creating, you're being very vulnerable. You're like showing a different side of yourself, especially if you're new, that's not honed skills. And it's, oh, I'm trying something new. What if it turns out bad? What if I'm not a mother kind of
Yeah.
thing? Like it's a scary space to be in, but I really, and part of this school of American Thanatology was a lot had to do with that of putting yourself out there and like flexing the muscles of being creative with your grief, almost like with intention.
Mm,
Like since we named our daughter Clementine, I do a lot of Clementine art, but it's not always like that. It's not always a Clementine thing, but sometimes if I want to intentionally be like, I need to like paint my journey,
yeah.
a Clementine will come out. And I'm not necessarily a painter, but I just like to put something on paper.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really useful, attainable skill. Like you could just get a pen and paper and do it. You don't need to like buy supplies. Although I have a full office full of craft supplies.
Yeah. And I actually just thought of the fact that I dance. That is one of my
Ooh,
therapeutic, creative
okay.
things, but I do struggle with my own choreography. That's not something I do. I go
Sure.
and I have a friend that I dance with, and she teaches me a routine, and then I just do it. And that's not necessarily me creating it, but my body
And
is.
I was gonna say, no, that's absolutely because I will tell you, I love to dance, but I am terrible at it. Terrible. It's fine. I don't need to take, well, although I have been told that a way to move your grief is to move your body. And like
Oh,
dancing is a very Megalo wooey here, but like dancing is like a very like ancestral practice that humans have
mhm.
always done through time as a way to express themselves. So like it's literally in our DNA to do that, to get things moving. Not
Yeah.
even if you have an intention to it.
Yeah.
Um, and I will dance usually by myself in my house.
Sure, that works.
But that I always feel better after. But that and singing I've also heard, which I'm also not very good at, but I will do by myself in my house,
I will
is
do that
like,
by myself in my car. That's usually
yes,
where I'm belting it out.
it's a very like humans have done that since the beginning of time to feel things, to express things. That's a free way to do it. You don't even have to take
Yeah.
a class for it.
Yeah, for sure. But it is scary. Like I said, I've thought about doing the painting thing but I'm like, I feel like I would sit down and I would have too many expectations for myself. So it would take a lot of time to release.
Which is fine. One tip I would say with that is get a paint by number.
Oh, I used to love those when I was a kid.
Me too. And they make like cool ones for adults, like things that I would hang
Oh.
on my wall. And it's you're following a direction, but then you still finish this like beautiful thing. That's like
Mm.
one I did a paint by number birthday party a couple years ago,
Oh,
and
fun.
I found like beautiful Clementine pictures. I feel like I had one near me. I don't.
Oh.
And so everybody had like different, and it was like a beautiful floral arrangement with like oranges in it. And so it was like very intentional. Everybody was like, oh, this is like a beautiful picture. And I'm not a painter. It's, yeah, me neither. But we can all like,
You can follow the numbers.
yeah, you can just follow the numbers. And it's very, I don't know, it's a nice way to get back into it with having a desirable outcome. Cause sometimes
Yeah.
I paint and I'm like, that's not going to go on the wall.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's Glennon Doyle that just recently started painting. I reference her a
Uh-huh.
lot because I think she's amazing and I love her book Untamed, but
That's
she
a good
talks in
one.
her podcast all the time about painting. And I feel like she just has a room in her house and she goes, no one ever will see these ever.
Yes.
They
Which is
are literally just sitting in this room that she paints in and they're just piling up, but it's so therapeutic for her. She
yes.
loves it.
That's powerful to be like that vulnerable and expressing yourself through
Hmm.
that. That
Yeah.
is, again, a very humans have been putting things on rocks since the beginning of time. It's something that I feel like we have to create some way. I know a lot of people don't think that they're creative, but I think we all are in
Yeah.
different
You just have to
ways.
find the right
Mm-hmm.
form for
And you
you.
don't have to be like very good at it either. That's also something that I had to learn.
That's with me going back to dance because I started when I was 3 years old
Wow.
and I competed all through till I was, I think, a junior in high school. And then I was cheerleading at the same time. So then I quit to do cheer because it was a lot to do both. And then dabbled in it again in my early 20s. I tried out for some of the Denver Nuggets dancers and the Broncos cheerleaders.
Okay.
I didn't make the teams, but I
Uh-huh.
tried out. And so then I quit for a little while because I was training pretty hard for that. And then I just recently I'm like, I just want to do this. I don't it feels good to me. And while I do definitely still have my own expectations on myself,
Sure. Sure.
I'm trying to get better at that, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
not trying to be the best. I'm not trying to have the best technique. This is for me and for
Yes.
my emotions to release it and to do whatever I need to do.
Oh my
Um,
God, I'm obsessed with
but
this for you.
I wish I could do it more. It's very expensive, not gonna lie.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
also just finding the time to meet with my other gal and
mm-hmm.
stuff like that. But when I do it, it's great. And I do try to redo the routines at my own house. We video them
Mm-hmm.
every time. If I'm feeling it one day, I can just be in my backyard and do one of the routines we did. But yeah, I had to release that expectation. I've actually been trying to get my sister to do it with me because she was a huge dancer too. And she was probably actually
Oh.
better than me. And I didn't think I was that great, but she was really good. And she's had a hard time going back to it. And I'm like, but you need to release those expectations of
Mm-hmm.
I need to do this perfectly. I need to have the best technique. And especially competing when we were younger, we had to do it,
Right, right.
that way.
And
And
so
now
it's
it's
a
a
little
different form.
different. Yeah, absolutely. And finding
Mhm.
somebody you can do that with is like extra lovely because for me, I'll be held accountable.
Yeah.
And it's as long and it doesn't even have to be a safe person. I cried in front of my new coach the other day.
Mhm.
Like someone that knows you to be like, oh, things might get weird, but
Yeah.
also that's part of it. And
Yeah.
I think that is
And no
so
judgment.
exciting. Yeah, and no judgment.
Hmm.
I love this for you.
Oh, thanks.
I can't wait to check in soon and be like, are you dancing?
Yeah, I'm actually going on Tuesday following this recording.
See?
So yeah, I try to do it like once a month. So that's usually, I wish I could do it
That's
more,
very
like I
cool.
said, but
Hmm.
it's not as easy as just buying some paints or whatever. It's a little bit more complicated, but I still love it. So
So I was a life coach for a few years and I life coached mainly women that were dealing with infertility. And I developed this whole curriculum
wow.
and I did my master's work in like making curriculum. So I was like, oh, I'm doing all the things, putting them all together. And then it just didn't feel right to me anymore. And then I redid my curriculum that to be based on child free after infertility and making new life goals because I feel like that is my
Yeah.
number one tip of try something new. And it's very scary, but also, who do you want to be in 10 years, in 3 years? Are you doing something to make yourself more that person? And it can literally be like washing the dishes every day, because
Yeah.
that is one goal that I need to practice. And I think it's made my life more exciting. And especially like coming off of the grief of infertility, it's made my life not focused on that grief, but also still using it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Like I'm doing it because I want to push myself, but I also don't want to be sitting at home thinking about how I don't have children.
Yeah.
Or like when I try, for example, the like this rowing crew, like when I go out there, most of these people talk about their children. It's fine, but when we get on the water, we're not, because we have
Mhm.
to be focused and paying attention. And actually, the first time that like I did it, I was so overwhelmed, but they were like, wasn't that fun? And I was like, I wouldn't use the word fun because that was really intense for me because you guys were shouting out all these words I didn't know, but I was not thinking about my life or my
Mhm.
worries. And honestly, I will come back because of that.
Yeah. To get that break. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that when we find those things in our life, whether physical, mental, artistic, some way that we're like doing something to push ourselves to be a different person, a better person, a more exciting person, the more the person you want to be, that's a really fun way to
Yeah.
live.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting because I also think that even when you are somebody that goes on to have kids, you do lose yourself to some
Yeah,
degree as well.
absolutely. Because you're a
So,
mother and like that,
mhm.
your kids do deserve you in that way. But a lot of these people even had said, because I said that I wasn't thinking about my stressors, and they're like, yeah, I'm not thinking about my stressors too, and I know that most likely has to do with their children, and it's a break.
Yeah. And then a lot of these people have to go through that after the kids leave the house.
Yes, they do.
So
They
they're
do.
going through it. They're just going through it later and then
Yes.
trying to figure out what do I like to do? What are my hobbies again? Because I've just been doing the kid stuff for 18 years. But, anyways, we did a little bit of a poll on Instagram and Facebook. I think we've touched on most things, but do you know if there's anything that we have not touched
Um,
on from
I
those?
don't. The notes that I took, we went over all of the things that I have. It's not linear. Give yourself a lot of grace.
Yes.
I think to like, especially like being like a few years out of all of this grief and knowing that there's more grief to come, like your grief really evolves over time. And for me recently, like when we put our dog down, like a lot of other grief came up for me of losing our daughter, and my mom has cancer, and just like having that and like acknowledging that like your grief builds and it
So that's
compounds.
oh, that's so funny. So one of the comments that I was just reading over in my screenshots was about compounding grief. She says it's been 4 years and it's difficult not to feel stuck. And these things keep happening to me, but I can't find a way out. So what are your thoughts on that?
Again, I think you got to do something with your grief, and it doesn't have to be publicly or whatever, but either create or write. Like you have to do something with it. That's been very helpful for me. So, like I said, painting a picture with, and you can even have your grief in mind and you can cry the whole time and you don't have to show anybody and you can toss it in the trash when you're done. But just like doing something with your grief that's intentional. Again, the School of American Thanatology is huge on that. And they have courses and classes that you don't take with people. It's like just you by yourself, or you can take them with people. It's a great resource to be able to move your grief around
Hmm.
and not let it get stuck, because it can. And then you start to get stuck, and that
Yeah.
feels very like stagnant and stiff. And I think like we all want to like flowy, carefree, a little bit more life. And I
Yeah.
think doing things, dancing, something like that to do something with it. And again, like maybe when you go dance, you're not like, this is for my infertility, but you're like you're doing something to move
Yeah.
things around.
Yeah.
And it has been, it's like sometimes very scary and difficult to do those things, but I think that they really help.
I was going to say that too. It kind of makes you face your grief a little bit more.
Totes.
And I think that's how maybe the compounding grief happens.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's also due to the many things happening to you in your life in a shorter period of time or
Yes.
even spread out and it's still
Yep.
compounding. I think it's tough because then you have to actually face it and process through it.
Mm-hmm. Which is
And that is hard to
scary.
do on your own.
Yeah.
And it is scary too. I think definitely that's great advice to find something. I've actually heard about, I have a client who does the horse therapy stuff at her ranch.
Yes.
And so I find something that works for you individually, whatever that is, to release whatever lights you up. I think that
Yes.
helps a lot
Yes.
too, because I know dance really lights me up.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
music really lights me up. Concerts really light me up. So
Mm-hmm.
all along that same line, maybe I should try to learn some instrument or something. Find that thing. I think that thing that lights you up helps release some of that
Mm-hmm.
and process through some of this stuff too.
It's interesting that you say concerts because I love going to concerts. And every time I go to concerts now, I burst into tears every time because I
Mm.
think of my daughter. And it's perfect. Like it's exactly what I need and makes me feel good. And you're like in this space with all of these other people and that see me cry and they don't even know why, but they're like, I get it. This song is great. Or like it's just it's such a communal
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. And everybody's feeling that music.
Yes.
And everybody's
Yes.
there because they like that music too.
Yes.
So
Yes.
everybody's there to have a good time. And
Mhm.
then you can feel that energy.
And I think that like with like I one thing I wonder, and I don't, it is what it is, but if we would have seen a doctor sooner and then maybe taken breaks, I might not
Mm,
have felt so balls to the wall, we're doing this. But I think that is very common in infertility of you
yeah.
just hit it hard. But I also have known people that have taken breaks and whether they go back or not, they feel differently about it in
Mm,
such a lighter way. Oh, I did therapy. Oh, I didn't try to get pregnant for a year. And that is also something that whether baby or not, they just felt better about it. And that wasn't an option for me. And I think that like even listening to myself now, I know that if I would hear myself, I'd be like, nope, I'm not doing it because that's not my style. But I
mm.
think I see the beauty in it. Like I have two friends right now online that stopped for 3 years and they're going back. And while it is hard to watch, I see them in such a lighter space. And I'm
That's
like, oh,
interesting.
wow, you're a different person. I am also a different person and don't necessarily want to hold your hand through this, but I see you approaching this in a softer way than you were before.
Ugh, that prospect terrifies me right now because I feel in such a good place right now.
Yes,
Mostly, I have my moments for
of
sure, and I'm
course.
still working through a lot, but the thought of going and throwing myself back into all of that terrifies me. I
Same.
don't want to go back. I feel like it
Hmm.
would throw me back to,
Hmm.
I think I would go into it with a different mindset for sure.
Absolutely.
But I am also, I don't know, but after maybe I haven't even had a year past my last embryo transfer. I'm like still very much early
Hmm.
stages of it. So maybe after a year or two,
Who knows? Who
eventually you
knows?
could. But yeah,
Yeah, it's just interesting to think about not approaching it so hard because
yeah,
I hit that really hard
yeah,
and read all the books, did all the
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Just it
It's
became
really hard not to spiral into that.
agreed, but I think also with that, that's a big part of like how I lost myself in it and was like
Hmm.
so low and so sad because I did not have space for anything else. And just like we were just saying with like motherhood, like there's a time and place to like of course your kids are your world, but I have some really good friends that also like don't see their kids sometimes to be like I need a break, like
Yeah,
I go on a week break by myself because that's something that I need so
yeah,
I can remember who I am. And it's yeah, who's Carrie, like I need to come back to who that is.
yeah.
That has been, I have to say, the best gift of becoming child free after infertility is I just get to focus on all that I want. And I have been called selfish because of that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like the
No.
way people have said that, like, I feel like you're being selfish. And I'm like, you're saying that like it's a bad thing.
But
Why
what would you
can't,
do if you didn't have your kids?
and like, why
Like,
can't, yeah, why can't
you,
I?
what else are you going to do with your life, really,
Mhm.
besides
A
be
lot of people were
you?
like, especially because I left teaching, and they were like, oh, you could still be a teacher. I'm like, but I don't want to be a teacher anymore. So I'm not going to, because I get this one life and I want to do it how I want to do it. And it makes people like, I see their feathers ruffle as I'm talking to them. And I'm like, that's on you, because while I definitely still have some really tough days, I am by far the happiest I've ever been in my life. And that feels like the biggest gift I could give myself.
I truly want to know though what these people would do if they did not have kids.
I
You
mean,
that's what you do. You have to live your life.
yeah, you have
So
to live your
why
life.
not if you don't have to pour your whole soul into raising another human being in this world, why not pour it into yourself and your partner or
I agree. It's interesting, like a lot of feedback that I get from this. It's actually now it's not even shocking anymore, because I'm like,
sure.
oh, youth, especially because so I stopped teaching and we were still trying to have kids. And I wasn't really like working, and my writing is part-time. And I think people are like, you're just, what do you do all day? And I'm like, whatever the fuck I want.
Yeah.
I do what I want. And
Yeah.
I think that people get upset about that because, number one, I have the capability to do that. And also,
Mm.
I'm not like serving something else.
Yeah.
And I do want to volunteer more, but also I don't have to. I do it in my own ways, and I have to take care of myself first. And again, the amount of the how selfish gets thrown at me, it's not a bad word for me anymore. I feel like it used to be, and now I'm like,
Mm.
oh, it's like I get to show up for my friends and family in a way that
Yeah.
I don't think I would have been able to if I was a mom.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't do therapy and work with my grief. And it's an honor to host as much as we do and be there for my friends when they're having a really hard time. And it's a space that takes a lot of energy in some ways.
Yeah. Sure. What would you say to closure being a terrible word and a burden?
So I have an interesting take on this. I don't necessarily believe in closure. I don't
Okay.
even feel like it's a real thing.
Okay.
I think we want it to be. It'd be,
Because that indicates that it shuts the grief off and it
yes. And
never
it like
shuts off, right?
wraps up in a bow and you get to put
Yeah.
it on the shelf and never look at it. But even with like past breakups that I've had, there's no like closure. Like it's just over, but you still think about that person. They still come up in your life in weird ways. And so I feel like grief does the same thing. And I love my grief because it's my story. So
Mm.
I like to bring it up. And that I know often isn't welcomed, because I know many people that are like, well, I have a hard time feeling my feelings. I am
Mm.
like, I want to feel my feelings all day long, all the time. It's my favorite thing. I write about it. I'm making money off of this. So like
Yeah.
this is literally what I do. But at least for me, I know that when like, and this was one thing I took away from the grief counselor, where she was like, it's never going to go away. And
Hmm.
if you just love it and honor it and nurture it in ways that make you feel good, which means you're going to have to get curious about it and it's going to not feel good because you're going to try things that won't work, it can be a part of you, but it doesn't have to be the whole part. Like it's not, I remember being like, what do I say when somebody asks me if I have kids? Do I tell them that I have a stillbirth? And I was in a support group and they were like, you'll figure it out. It's not going to be a fun thing to figure out, but
Trial and error,
yeah,
unfortunately.
you're going to have to figure it out. And for me personally, like if Susie in line behind me at the grocery store asks me, I'm probably going to say, no, I don't have kids. And I'm not going to go into it because
Right.
I don't plan on having a relationship with this person. But if I do meet somebody that I want to be involved with, I'm probably going to bring it up pretty early on of, oh yeah, well, I have this thing because it's part of me, but it's not all of me, but it's going to come up. And
Yeah.
especially I feel like with friends that have kids a lot, where I'm like, oh, I do have some issues in this area. And it's not a terrible
Hmm.
thing. It's just that invite me to your kid's party, but know that I might not come. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But I still want to be included, but
Hmm.
also know
Yeah,
that,
we talked a lot about that
yes,
in episode 8. So if you guys
yes.
want more about how to include your infertile friends in your life, please listen to that one.
So I don't feel like there's a closure. And I
Yeah.
feel like if people say that, I wonder, is that real? Does that feel
Mm.
good? Because then I feel like I'm denying a part of myself and a part of my story, and I don't
Mm.
want to do that.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I'm just looking through some of these other.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody said grief, so many levels, abandonment, exclusion, devastation, all those feelings.
All are very valid. All are a part of it.
Yeah, abandonment is an interesting one in certain circumstances as I'm trying to think through that.
Yeah, I took one of my friends, she became a best friend. She was this elderly woman. I met her at the restaurant I was working at, and she needed someone to help with her knee surgery. So she hired me to do that. And then we just became best friends. And I ended up becoming her housekeeper and would go over there 2 times a week. And mainly we would just hang out. But she was lovely. And she was older and she was diagnosed with cancer and she didn't want to do treatment. Excuse
Hmm.
me. And her family was really upset about that, which is fair.
Mm-hmm.
But she got a lawyer and had me sign papers saying that she was of sound mind to not have treatment because
Oh
she
my
was.
goodness.
And I think that her adult children there were some that were on board, but some that were not. And I think that they were like grieving and didn't know how to let go of their mom. And granted, it wasn't my mother, but I was like, she's of sound mind. Like, I've known her for 10 years now, and she's always been like this. And she's saying she doesn't want treatment. I don't want her to die either, but I do feel like if this is what she wants, we have to honor that. And
Yeah.
it, and I never talked to her kids again after that. And this was years ago because they cut me off, which is fine. But I'm assuming they felt abandoned by their mom.
Mm.
And I don't know what that's particularly like in that way, but I do know that I continue to love this woman.
Mhm.
And I, grief as an abandonment can be tricky. Like, it doesn't
Mhm.
feel good, but I also know that I wanted to just give her best life that she wanted in this era. And it's a weird, tricky feeling, but I don't know. I think it's different for everybody.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and I do think that when we label it in these ways, I think it's important to do that because then we can like work with those words specifically. So want to call it that and work with it.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, geez. I think we've pretty much touched on everything as I'm going through these things. Do you have anything else you want to touch on
I
in
feel
regards to this topic?
I feel like there are so many resources out there that can help you if you just Google what you're feeling. Like, also Google a lot of times I was like, do you need help? Like, I've gotten that. Here's a helpline, which I'm like, oh, I'm not there, but I appreciate the information. But
Yeah.
I think that Instagram, TikTok, there are a lot of visual short bursts of information that can help get you started on feeling better with your grief or even continue the growth with your grief because people are dealing with the same thing you're dealing with.
Mhm.
We're not alone in this. No matter
Mhm.
what situation you think you're not alone, which is wild because there's some niche things.
For sure.
But
For
I
sure.
think reaching out to either a therapist, getting help, or even just following somebody that has dealt with something that you have is a really nice way to just see that there is life, there's greatness, and that people are doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe they'll spark something new in you that you'll be
Absolutely.
like, oh, maybe that would help me. Or
Uh-huh.
another beauty of the online resources.
Yes. Yes. Agreed. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I know it's a tough topic, but I also think it's an important one and one that I think probably every single one of my listeners is dealing with to some capacities. Yeah, so thank you for that conversation. That was so
Again,
good.
thank you for including me. This is one of my favorite topics, and I love being able to share what's helped me and help others find what helps them.
Yeah. And I love chatting with you. You're
Me
so
too.
wonderful. And I hope everyone loves listening to us because this is going to be the third episode with you on here. Anyways, thank you so much, Carrie. I appreciate you so much. And again, I'm sure we'll have more conversations in
I
the
hope
future.
so. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.